There's always things to be humbled about. I mean, there's always ways we can see that we fall short or we wish we might be better. It's not really about that. It's more about, what do you care about? Where do you really want to spend your time and energy and attention? If you are curious about the deeper aspects of yourself and the deeper aspects of the world, then this is a great path to just spend time in nature.
Welcome to the Soulful Impact podcast. I'm your host, Brooks Barron, and my guest on today's episode is Rebecca Wildbear. Rebecca is a senior soul guide with the Animas Valley Institute. In fact, she was one of two guides that led me on my first vision quest. She's also a psychotherapist and the founder and creator of Wild Yoga, an organization through which she leads retreats and online programs that help people connect to their inner wildness, their embodied soulful nature, and their activated sense of purpose for creating a better world. Rebecca and I have also had the pleasure of leading several vision quests together as co-guides.
I think that soul is kind of intimate, quiet voice in us that maybe stays hidden until we're ready to know it. But it's also meant to be lived in relationship with all the other parts of ourselves and the parts of the world.
This conversation is a goldmine for anyone who is curious to deepen their connection to soul and create soulful impact. Rebecca and I discuss how building relationship with soul is really just that. It's a relationship. We also talk about how our relationship with other important realms, including wild nature, the realm of dreams, and also the mysterious world of our bodies and our hearts. All those relationships play such a key role in getting to know our souls and creating soulful impact.
Being guided by my body and heart takes a certain degree of self-love, which has always been a challenge. And the trees have helped me develop more and more of it over the years. But it's like loving my body well enough to not push it in ways it doesn't want to go.
This conversation is really about how to learn to listen to our deeper selves and to the world around us in order to step into our highest potential. We discuss the important topic of trauma, what trauma means, and also how it plays into the soul journey. We talk about how to approach the really vital task of healing our trauma, both individually and collectively. And we land on a really inspirational note as we celebrate the beauty that can result from healing our trauma. Because it's exactly through that healing journey that we become the beings who are capable of channeling our soul's gifts into the world. That we grow into the version of ourselves who can provide exactly what the world needs and that only we can give.
I've been a therapist a long time, since I started in my mid-20s. And so I've watched a lot of different trauma models come over all those years. And it used to be that what people thought was the thing to do was to go back into the trauma situations and re-experience them. And I don't actually think that's very valuable and could be re-traumatizing.
I left this conversation feeling so empowered and alive, and I hope you do too. Just a quick reminder before we begin the episode, if this conversation resonates with you, there's a high likelihood that you'd be a great fit for our work at Soulful Impact. Check out our offerings and learn more anytime at soulfulimpact.co. Rebecca, welcome to the Soulful Impact podcast, my friend.
Hey, Brooks, good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. I've been really looking forward to this, and it seems like we now hopefully have our technology working for us. We're navigating a wilderness of tech difficulties there, but I think we figured it out.
Yeah, personally, I find the forests and thunderstorms and windstorms much easier myself.
Totally. That's actually kind of appropriate for us, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That we are having this experience, but we're rolling with the waves as usual. So here we are.
Great.
So let's begin. I'd love to just invite you to maybe share a little bit about yourself with our listeners and maybe tell them about how we got to know each other.
Great. Well, one thing I'd say is I'm a person who's deeply in love with nature and in many ways felt more at home there than in the human world, or certainly in the city or technology world. And that's kind of been my career my whole life. Although I'm also a psychotherapist, trained as a psychotherapist, I've been a wilderness guide my whole life. First with Outward Bound in my 20s, and then with many other organizations, wilderness therapy organizations mostly. The last 20 years, I've been with Animas, almost 20 years, been with Animas Valley Institute. And about, I think, trying to remember, 15 years ago or so, I formed my own organization called Wild Yoga, which brings together connection to nature, connection to the body, heart, soul, kind of a broader soul and spirit journey, as well as personal healing and growth. And Brooks and I met amidst all that. We met, um,
Hmm.
he was a participant on an Animus quest, and gosh, I don't know how long ago that was. More than a decade ago.
10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, just over a decade. Yeah, that's right.
Eh,
You were a you were this you were this mysterious, so just kinda grounded and connected to nature, guy. I just remember being pretty having my mind blown by you 10 years ago when we first met.
mm, yeah, it was wonderful. We were in a beautiful canyon in Utah,
Mhm.
and yeah, a very remote, hardly visited canyon. And you had a powerful quest experience, I remember. And
I sure did.
then I don't know how long it was. It was only a few years ago you came to apprentice on a quest with me, and then after that we worked together a bit, and helped you do some of your own, orchestrate some of your own quests and creations. So,
That's right.
anyway, I'm
Yeah, that's right.
excited to keep the conversation going in this new way.
Likewise. Likewise. Yeah. So, yeah, you've been an amazing friend and colleague and mentor and guide for me on my journey of uh really coming home to my own soul on that first vision quest 10 years ago, and also deepening and broadening my connection to nature. I showed up on that quest with you and thought I thought I was considering myself at the time as already a person who was deeply connected to nature, having grown up in Colorado and always loved the outdoors, and done a lot of camping and outdoor adventuring of different types. But that quest really opened my eyes to the animate world, which is obviously such a big part of what the Animas Valley Institute is about and what you're about with wild yoga. But why don't we start with, would you share a little more about your own journey, and maybe starting with your journey of opening to a deeper connection with nature and really realizing what's possible and how much more is possible than most of us in the Western world are brought up to believe?
Yeah. In many ways, it started as a child when, even though I grew up in the suburbs, climbing in trees and spending time at the ocean and in the Pine Barrens when I visited my grandparents, and in the Western Maryland Deep Creek Lake area when I was young. And I always had a connection and was happier in nature, loved to be outside. And, that's kind of why I went into wilderness guiding as soon as I could in my 20s. But even that, and then wilderness therapy, because I liked psychotherapy and being a psychotherapist and helping people heal. But even by the time I was in my mid to late 20s, that somehow wasn't a deep enough connection. I could feel that there was more possibilities. And it's sort of, I guess it's saddened me a little bit that nature was a just recreation, although I totally enjoyed all the things, kayaking, biking, rock climbing. But something, it just, there was more I could feel. And helping people heal. I would, help people come and they'd be in the wilderness for a while and they'd be healthier when they left, young people and families. So it was in my late 20s that I got involved with Animas Valley Institute. I found them while I was searching. I was thinking I was going back to school for maybe eco psychotherapy and trying to figure out how I was going to find out more about this deeper connection and looked into a lot of things. But it was actually in my late 20s going to an Animas 5-day Soulcraft intensive. I later found out it was the first Soulcraft intensive they ever had. It was in Virginia, and I lived in
Whoa.
and I l
No way.
yeah, and I lived in West Virginia, and it was in Virginia. I think it was also one of the
Huh.
first East Coast offerings they had, and I was just the practices that happened of actually talking to nature. No one had ever told me to talk to nature. Most humans were trying to limit my relationship with nature in some way, but they were inviting me to have a deeper connection, that more was possible. And I also did dream work there and ceremonies with the land. And I felt myself connect even to something then inside myself. Like you might call it my true voice. There's a lot of voices in our psyche with a lot of varying opinions. It can be like a crazy meeting of a lot of people that disagree in our own heads. Um, and so it can be hard to tell, well, which voice is the wise one and which one should I follow or listen to. And being in nature all those days in that deep way, conversation with the land and dreams, I was suddenly able to come to a voice inside me. It didn't have much to say, but I could just feel like this quiet stillness, this is the center, this is the something connected to the true voice, and this is the path to finding more about what that voice has to say. And so it was 6 months later, I believe I went on a quest, and I moved from West Virginia to Utah at the same time to accept another position in wilderness therapy, at a different organization. And it wasn't long after that, I think a year or so, that I joined the SAIT program, the Soulcraft Apprenticeship and Initiation Program. It was pretty new at that point, just starting in the last year or two. And that was a long, comprehensive program. I have a master's in counseling, but that program was more comprehensive than a master's degree.
That's the primary guide training program that Animas offers, right?
It is, and it's very experiential, very in the field. So
Hmm.
it was like all in nature. So I was always taking time to go out in nature on more of these um, programs, quests, excursions, personal growth opportunities, connecting to nature, 3 or more a year, and mentoring. And I did that for 6 years before I graduated. And I think I became a guide. At that time, you could become a guide before you graduated. I do not believe that's possible now, but I think I was a guide for a couple of years before I graduated, just 1 or 2 programs a year, not a lot. And even for the first several years I worked with Animus, I was only guiding a few programs a year. It wasn't until, I don't know, 12 years ago or so when I started guiding more full time. So that's why I had started wild yoga, even, around a little bit after I first became an Animus guide. I wasn't guiding enough programs, with Animus at that time. And I still wanted to do more of this work. And I also had explored other things outside of Animus that spoke to me. I was a yoga teacher, and I used to be on the faculty at Nasara Yoga Institute for many years. I have like more than 1,000 hours of yoga teacher training with them, and then I also studied with other people too, although they're my primary teachers. But I studied the Anusara and Iyengar methods because they're actually a little bit in contrast to my training, which is breath with motion and yoga flow. But I like to see both sides of things, so I wanted to study the other side. But my yoga is pretty. I work a lot with yoga with people who don't do yoga. So my classes are meant to just invite everyone into their body and our sort of body, imagination, nature connection all at the same time, not just typical yoga class. But I believe that the body training is essential. And I also studied Hakomi, which is a body centered psychotherapy, and somatic archaeology, which is a body centered body work. So I felt that I wanted to bring the body piece in, which as part of the healing and the soul journey too. So that enabled me to get training to do that. And I also studied meditation as well. And yeah, so I'm just and more spiritual kind of pursuits in various different professions. I was a philosophy religious studies major in college, and I've studied a lot of Buddhist thought along with the meditation. And I really like to bring the spiritual dimension in as well as the soul dimension. So I'm kind of about opening people to all these voices and relationships that they don't normally listen to, including nature, soul, dreams, body, heart, and that they're all really essential and they're all really related. So
I love that. And you're good at it.
thank you.
So, in your own words, how would you describe the way that soul plays into all of that? Or what is soul in your own experience?
Well, I would say um, soul is something that might be hard to quantify in a words or a specific description entirely. But that being said, I'll still give it a try. Uh, Animus. I'll start with Animus's description, where I work and guide. Often describes soul as connected to or as actually our mythopoetic identity, like the myth or poem that we're here to live. So it's like it's not like a specific job role like doctor, mother, teacher. It's like a mystery. I call it another way I like to say it is living a mystery into the world. So you can get a vision or a mirroring of yourself at the deepest essence, which might be kind of hard for your logical mind to fully understand, like dream images can be, but you can feel something has mirrored you deeply from the universe, and you're like, whoa, this is it. This is the essence of who I came here to be. This is me at the core. And I didn't know it, but finally something saw me and showed this to me. And so now I want to try to understand it better and I want to try to live it. So, like, you could think of myth like a story, like a deeper story, or like a poem. Those both have that feel of living a mystery into the world. I can give you more examples later if you want, but I'm just going to move on to some couple other definitions. And that one another definition Animus uses, I think, is like you're part of your ecological niche. Like you're, it's about being in relationship with everything. Like it's the ecological, it's the place, it's your place in the world. It's your ecological niche. In other words, I can't operate as my soul just in isolation. It takes occupying my ecological niche in the world, being in relationship in the place or places I'm meant to be, uh, doing my giveaway or having my conversation in the world. Um, and I sort of altered Animas's definition a little bit. That's not entirely their definition. It kind of moving it a little towards my definition, which is it's about relationship. And I think that it's impossible to live our souls, or if we aren't also in relationship with all the other aspects of the world around us, our own hearts, our own bodies, other people, that even the aspects of mainstream society like that, or even, corrupt aspects or aspects that are hard. It's like, I mean, that we could be in relationship by having a boundary, but we're still in a relationship. Like soul is, it's this kind of intimate, quiet voice in us that maybe stays hidden until we're ready to know it. But it's also meant to be um, lived in relationship with all the other parts of ourselves and the parts of the world. And I think there's a deep connection to a few other strands that I'll just put out. Our innocence,
Hmm.
like our inner
Mm.
child innocence. I think there's a really deep pathway to soul there, possibility.
Yep.
And our heart, like our emotions, our passion, our emotional depth. There's a real possibility there, and even our vulnerability and places of deepest wounding is often connected with our gifts and what we're asked to give or be or do in the world.
Wow. So much resonance that I'm feeling with all of that. So much truth ringing in my being and related to my own journey, starting on that first quest that you guided me on, and the the dream that came to me at the end, and yeah, that feeling of being so deeply seen, so mirrored by life, and at that moment, I didn't even fully have, the frameworks to kinda comprehend what it was that had happened, but I knew at the core of me, like, at the deepest level of my being, I knew that I had just been seen like I had never been seen before, and it was this amazing validation of because I'd also always suspected on some level. I'd known, even if I couldn't have put it into words maybe at the time, that I was more than just the stories and the specifics of this lifetime, that there's more to me than that, and more that something that could only be maybe represented on that mythic level, but an essence of me that I'd always believed was there, but then gotten kind of worried and lost and maybe doubted it because I just didn't know if anybody else saw it or didn't know if it was crazy for me to believe that it was even possible. But then when that first soul encounter happened, it was like, oh my God, it's here. Like, this is
Mhm.
it. This is this truth that I've been circling around, or longing for deeper connection with for my whole life. And wow, yeah, thank you. Thanks to nature, thanks to the dream realm, and thanks to this remarkable ceremony of the quest itself and skilled guidance from you and Sage, um, it appeared.
Yeah, I think like it's great to hear you describe it again, and I can just even hear in your voice the way you describe it, the meaning that it has, and I think that's true for most people that I hear have that experience. It's one of the most meaningful moments in your life to have an encounter like that.
Yeah, hands down. Puts it all into perspective. And you realize, like, okay, this is what really matters. This is who I really am. This is what I came to do. Of course, on the mythic level, on the metaphorical level. So it wasn't like a blueprint of directions for here's the next action steps for you to take. But it was a door opening to here's the deepest truth inside of yourself. And your job is just to stay connected to this and follow the mystery of it.
Yeah, I think a lot of times it's that it's that moment of that encounter that's the juiciest, and then we get the challenge of actually living
Right.
what we receive, which is also very fruitful and amazing, but also has its challenges or hardships. But it's the juice of that moment that can help remind us of how important it is.
100%. And I think that maybe is where what you were saying about all those relationships really becomes more important than ever. I think, like you said, those relationships are key in the first place to even get ourselves to that point where we can have that kind of encounter with the deepest truth at the center of our beings. But then after that, it's really important to be uh, connected to all those different supportive threads from, actual human community with other people who get it and can provide some solidarity and guidance and support and friendship on this journey, but also with nature. I remember coming back, um, and for me, I went back to complete my MBA at Stanford right after this life changing vision quest. And man, I thank God that I was living in this amazing house in Woodside, California, which is this community nestled into the redwood forest at the base of this of the Santa Cruz Mountains, nearby to Palo Alto, and I could just every day I could just walk outside or go find a nearby trail, and um, Stanford's campus itself is also so beautiful, and so finding little moments in between my classes to just go sit in a quiet, sunny corner and connect with a tree. Those relationships got me through. Like, I don't know if I could have made it otherwise. I would have probably lost myself.
Yeah, great to hear about that. Yeah, there's a major challenge in keeping the connection alive
Yeah,
after the experience.
especially in our modern culture that doesn't make it easy on us.
Mhm, mhm. It takes kind of having to sense how precious it is. When something's precious, we remember. To even if we forget, we come back to remembering. So,
So, for those of our listeners who might be newer to these topics or to this exploration of soul and also connection to nature in this way, deepening relationship with nature and soul, um, what's some guidance you might offer or ideas you might give people who are listening to this episode and they're curious about all this stuff? Maybe it resonates with them on some level of their being, but it's also kind of new. What would you offer them?
well, if there's a curiosity, um, to explore the relationships outside of what mainstream culture tells us is the most important relationships to a your years and maybe the tasks that we have to do whatever in the daily world, that there's actually just such a much larger um there's a much larger world to connect to, and a much more mysterious and deeper aspect of yourself. And if there's some curiosity to know this life beyond what you know and have these relationships, uh begin where you are. It's always humbling. That's the thing. Whenever we do anything new, or like sometimes there can be resistance. Oh my gosh, I'm not good at this. How can I go out and talk to nature? I never did that before. And how can I listen to my heart? Like, I haven't listened to it for the last decade, if that's true for you. So it can be humbling to, but there's always things to be humbled about. I mean, if we're really being true to our heart and our humanity, there's always ways we can see that we fall short, or we wish we might be better. Um, it's not really about that. It's more about, what do you care about? Where do you really want to spend your time and energy and attention? And if you are curious about the deeper aspects of yourself and the deeper aspects of the world, then this is a great path to just spend time in nature. Go out there, have a conversation with nature. It involves accessing your imagination. Like, you have to kind of call into your inner 5-year-old, who would, if you told a 5-year-old, go talk to nature, they'd probably just say, okay, that sounds like a fun game. Let's imagine. But we need to connect to that part now. We're told in our culture to put our imagination away oftentimes when we start first grade, that's 6. But really, the truth is we need our imagination more than ever, our whole life, even as adults. And, soul speaks through image. So if we want connection to our soul, we have to reinvite this imagination and not have this question all the time. Is it imagination or is it real? The answer is
Mhm.
yes and yes. And so, go out and have a conversation with nature. See what happens. It's okay if nothing happens, or oftentimes people perceive nothing happens. I have so many people who come back after their wanders and say, not much happened. And I say, oh, well, can you tell me the not much that didn't happen? And then we find, oh, actually, quite a bit happened. So it's easy to discount our own stories, but sometimes the smallest and most subtle things are very significant and important. Remember your dreams. Like, the mainstream world just says dreams don't even mean anything. But I mean, even Carl Jung found that that wasn't true, and he set a lot large schools in motion to pay attention to dreams. And there's so many different people that have taken that and run with it and worked with dreams. And I've worked with dreams the last 2 decades, my own and other people's. And I can tell you absolutely, absolutely, without a doubt, dreams have significance. They just, we dream in hidden codes, so we just don't know. It's hard to interpret our own dreams or even get the meaning of it. But even writing it down in the present tense and remembering it and musing on it, Being curious. Why would the dream maker give me this dream? And what does this mean? Is a great start. Finding a buddy who also values their dreams and sharing it back and forth, or working with somebody on your dreams, even just a few. If you work just a few dreams and you see the power they have, you won't doubt it anymore. Dreams have really directed my life in a large way. I'd be living in a very different way if it wasn't for my dreams. And it's not that my life is better or worse, I have challenges. The human life is incredibly challenging, and I have joys. There's so much beauty and joy here. Um, but it's a different life. It's one that's meaningful, that feels connected to what the direction I feel that I'm here to live, what I'm here to offer. So I'm grateful, very grateful to my dreams. Dreams in nature and my body and heart are my primary guides, as well as soul.
How do you allow yourself to be guided by your body and your heart?
Well, in many ways, maybe being for me, maybe being guided by my body and heart is a little harder than even nature and my dreams. And that might be different for different people. But being guided by my body and heart takes a certain degree of self love, which has always been a challenge. And the trees have helped me, fortunately, develop more and more of it over the years. But it's like loving my body well enough to not push it in ways it doesn't want to go. I know that sounds really simple, but I had cancer.
Easier said than done, though,
It
right?
is. I mean, I had cancer when I was 21, and as a youngster, 21, I consider that kind of a youngster. I
Yeah.
was in college and smart and trying to do all the things. I was editor of the newspaper. I just felt superhuman, like I could do all these great things, and I had an enthusiasm about them, but I was also at the same time pushing my body beyond its limits. My conversation with cancer was my body saying to my mind, "Hey, you can't go anywhere without me. I'm not your slave." And so I had to reorient my relationship with my body entirely. That maybe my body knew more than my mind, and I have really had to deeply listen, and we had to be in partnership, and I had to do and be things that my body wanted. And it's also trusting my body's sensing, because even now I can think of a program I was invited to do this year, and my mind was like, "Yeah, I want to do it. I want to do it. I want to do it." My body's like, "No, you already said enough yeses to things, and you need more space." And I pushed it. I was like pushing it forward. No, come on, we can do this. We can do this. We can find a way to do this. And then my body's like, "No, you can't. You're already doing enough." And so then I just have to say, "Okay, yeah, okay." Like, I have to rest. I have to relax. I have to plan more downtime. That's what my body likes, to rest, to just be. I can't be doing all the things. I have to take breaks, and I have to have pleasure and joy and things that the body likes too, which for me are swimming and yoga and being in nature, and just time to not have to do things. Yeah, and my heart too. It's a similar thing. That's another whole dimension of welcoming my emotional experience. As you might know, sometimes we don't like our emotions. Sometimes I don't like mine. I'm like, can we change the channel? No, nope, that's what's here. So let me just be with that and believe that there must be something to learn from this emotion. There's some kind of communication that's happening from my heart. So let me just tune in and see what that is.
Beautifully said. Thank you. I was having the thought that learning to listen and discern what is what does a no and a yes feel like in our bodies? Like it sounds so basic, but actually so fundamental and easy to skip over. And it's also not for someone who has not been taught how to do that or hasn't practiced it in their lives. It can be actually tremendously difficult. It's like learning a brand new language. For you, Rebecca, what does how do you know? Like how do you know in your body what does a no feel like and what does a yes feel like?
Um, when it's a full yes, like there's something that lights me up. Um, like I feel a little bit. I feel like, yeah, like a energy, a little bit of lightness, a fire, almost a fierceness. Like we got to do this. Like this has got to happen. Like this is. And I don't know, sometimes I don't know when I'll finish, because sometimes, a lot of times it's a creative project that it's a yes to, that I have no idea when I'll, like, do it, you have time to do it or finish it. But I know that it's like I'm so excited about it that it's risen up on the priority list. This is a yes. Like, I have to find some way to make time for this as soon as I can, you know? Um, and a no to me sometimes has the opposite body feeling. It's like, feels like a little bit of like a slog, like, mm, yeah, like I don't really, something is like, I'm pushing myself here. Like, I want this, but the truth is I don't. I don't wanna, I know this is gonna take a lot of energy, and I'm not quite feeling the what it's going to, to give back to me if I push myself. So, yeah, it's then it starts to be moved down, might move into the maybe zone, like, as I'm feeling it out. But the more I can feel the effort and work it might be without actually maybe moving in the direction of what I really care about, the more it ends up being like, yeah, maybe not. Let's put this aside.
Yeah, it's really just about on some level, it's really just about fully being with our experience, isn't it? Like opening our eyes and our awareness to those subtleties that occur in our bodies, in our emotions, and my has my thoughts going back to dreams. And I know, one of the key questions that you always love to ask, that I also now love to ask doing dream work is, what does what is this dream wanting you to experience, or what is the dream maker wanting you to experience through this dream experience or feel or see? It's there's just so much richness that can come through fully opening to the depths of our experience, which is actually so vast as human beings.
Yeah, it really is putting away a little bit aside the everyday ego or the mind, like, even to ask that question, what does
Right.
the dream maker want me to experience? I mean, normally when people are new to dreams, they might be like, well, this person did this in the dream and this person did that. And I think this should have happened. And, we enter dreams with our ego's interpretation. And so it's completely different to enter the dream with like, yeah, well, what is everyone else trying to show me or tell me in the dream? And then the ego might protest, especially if it's a nightmare. Like, but yeah, but they're bad and it's not nothing good. They're not very smart. Or, and it's like, oh, well, maybe that's a possibility, but it also might be possible that that the ego might be wrong about that. And there might be something important the dream is showing us. And it's not that dissimilar with what I just said about the body and the heart. The ego and the mind might be like, but I want to do this and I think I should do this. It would be so good if I did this because of dot, 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 and then it's like, but the body and the mind are communicating something different. So how can I set aside my mind's thinks it knows for to listen to all these others?
It's a good question. Even just trying it out. That's
Mhm.
something that that works well for me sometimes when I'm stuck in my mind or my ego's hooked on something. And if I can just find the willingness to experiment, because the ego always wants to see things in black and white or right or wrong, and the ego wants its way to be the right way. So sometimes the instinct can be to try to or people who I coach or who I guide, they're like, well, should I should like argue against the ego or like prove it wrong. It's like, well, no, that's actually just more ego. But if you can open to the exploration, if you can tap into that sense of wonder again, like loved what you said earlier about childlike mind.
Mhm.
There's so much we can learn from children, so much I am learning from having a daughter who's
Mhm.
almost 2 years old and watching her explore the world. Oh my gosh, and just it's like that's how we actually make ourselves open to learning is just really letting go of the need to be right and exploring and see what happens.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it's kind of, I think it's kind of exciting. Like, you could, if you watch a young child, the world and that they're exploring, sometimes sometimes they get scared and afraid or sad, but a lot of time they're curious. Like they want to understand more. They're exploring everything, trying to take everything in. And somehow, as humans age, sometimes we can just like shut down, which might be another discussion. I think that's often related to trauma and protection, but we just, and we get used to things the way they, we might want to stick with what we know, even if it bores us, right? Because we know it and it's safe. But, you know, what we know is, I don't know, I get bored by what I know. If that was all there was. It's like this possibility of exploring and learning more always is quite exciting, and that happens by being in relationship with these other realms, nature, soul, dreams, our bodies, our hearts. Mhm.
Yeah, the world just becomes so much more magical,
Mhm.
doesn't it? I was having this conversation with a client who was in town for a custom retreat this week, and we were digging into this. Like, gosh, it's a difficult experience sometimes being a person who is awake to that magic, who has contacted or even just had some instinct to sense that, like, there's more to this world than meets the eye. And when we do allow ourselves to be in curious, wonder filled relationship with these other dimensions of life and these other beings, that so much becomes available that totally defies rational explanation. Like the mind cannot make sense of it. And then tragically in our quite ego driven culture, then anything that the mind can't make sense of gets pushed aside or ostracized or belittled or attacked or whatever. And man, yeah, there's so much to that, but it's also just, I mean, the upside of it is when you really do wake up to it and you find your way into being in right relationship with it, it's like, oh man, like life could not be more, it's literally cooler than I could have ever imagined.
Mhm. Mhm. It is, yeah, it reinvigorates, things, and and it becomes less about, well, the endless array of outside world things that we could get frustrated about and maybe should get frustrated or upset about, and becomes more about, this connection, the connections that we do have, and how they are guiding us, and in what ways they are guiding us to exist, to be with everything.
Let's dig into the thread you mentioned a few minutes ago around trauma and healing and um, the ways that all plays a role in this journey. I'd love to spend a few minutes exploring that together, and maybe perhaps that'll lead us back to that other piece you just named of maybe what are the things that are good to be upset about, and how can we how can this be a healing journey that actually empowers us to take leadership in creating a better world?
Mhm. Yeah, it's, um, the conversation itself, I think, involves, as much compassion as we can usher in, because it's such a hard topic, and when I say compassion, I mean compassion for ourselves. Sometimes compassion for ourselves, if you're like me, can be the hardest of all, but also compassion for others too, because, a lot of times we're the part of ourself that is traumatized has been activated. If you're feeling shame, well, that's a good sign of like, yeah, there's something about the part of me that's been traumatized is activated. Um, there's, uh, there's, sometimes we don't like the way other people act or their response. A lot of times people are coming from a traumatized place. And I don't think that means we should dismiss their behaviors or mean it doesn't mean that people can misbehave or act badly. But if we have the lens of understanding trauma, to me, I can have a little more compassion for maybe why that might have happened. And so I look at trauma.
How do you define what is trauma?
Trauma is often the part of us that's been hurt. I've studied different forms, and lately I've been interested in relational trauma, which I've been studying through the NARM model, more by reading the book and participating in NARM therapy than any going through any trainings at this point. But I've been studying it the last couple of years, so I've learned a lot, even in doing it that way, and integrated a lot into the work that I do with people and into the way I see myself and relationships. I think actually having a trauma focus in group dynamics is actually really, really wise.
Which is just like an attunement to where is there hurt here? Where is there hurt present that might need to be tended to, right? I think that's such a helpful distinction to make because oftentimes when we hear the word trauma, some people think, what I might call like the capital T traumas, like the really big, dramatic, and then there can be a story of like, oh, if I didn't, if I wasn't abused as a child, then I don't have any trauma, but then that's not actually helpful because then because we all get hurt in some way, right?
Exactly. We all get hurt. And we all have trauma. It's like there's nobody, I don't think there's anyone in this human world that can escape it. Another word, another word that in this book, Trauma and Soul, that I read, I'd have to look up to see who the author is. Actually, I have a Substack article in my Substack where I name him, but he's a Jungian therapist. But it talks about how, it uses another word for trauma interchangeably in a couple of places, and the word is experience. And I found that deeply meaningful because it talks about innocence versus experience. Like when you're innocent and you're more fresher to being born into the world, you haven't been exposed to maybe any trauma or certainly as much trauma. So there's still this power of your innocent way of being open and engaging with the world. But the more experience we have, the more that feature to be open can shut down. So so that's like the trauma. It's like just interacting with life um gives us it has a certain element of trauma given the state of the way the world is and relationships in the world are. And and then there's this part of the healing is how can I still be in touch with my innocence, with that core, essential core of me, my innocence, which is connected to my soul, despite the experience, the trauma. And if we're not able to do that, then it can be just the experience or the trauma that runs us. It might, shut us down, keep us in patterns, usually of protection or familiarity that don't allow us. And there's all sorts of different kinds of patterns. The NARM book has a a model which presents various personality types and the kinds of pattern that they hold. And when I studied Hakomi, they weren't trauma based, but they were body based, but it had some trauma stuff mixed in. And it was about the different personality styles, about the way people related to the world. And in in the NAR model, for example, there's one strategy called the connector type. And it's like you want connection, but you don't want connection because you've already experienced a lot of bad things from connection. So you're it's like you're constantly in this push and pull between wanting it and also like kind of pushing it away or keeping it at a distance. Um, and in Hakomi, there's one called the sensitive type, sensitive withdrawn type. And those two types are very similar, but in different models. But it's relationally how we learn to engage based on oftentimes what our early relationships were. How have we learned about what relationship is in the world and how to engage and how does that impact how we relate? And so it's not so much about a model about I think I've been a therapist a long time, since I started in my mid-20s. And so I've watched a lot of different trauma models come over all those years. And it used to be that what people thought was the thing to do was to go back into the trauma situations and like re-experience them. And that is not, I don't actually think that's very valuable and might actually could be re-traumatizing. There can be a way that I know a lot of models value telling the story, and telling the story over and over again till it loses its charge. There can be value in doing that. But this relational model I really love because it's actually about looking at the way you feel in relationships now. just tracking your emotions and your charges, and then you're able to oftentimes just like you like by imagination and dream, like as you're hanging out with those feelings, you can track the threads of where they come from in your history, like where you first started to learn that that was the way you needed to be in relationship. And then you can become more aware of like your traumatized way of being in relationship versus your authentic way of being in relationship. But it's not also to like push yourself to be like authentic and open every moment. I mean, that would be a really, I think, ridiculous a possibility. But
Yeah, well, that's probably a trauma-driven response actually on some level. If you're
yeah,
if you're pushing yourself and there's then, if you're believing you should be different than you are, there's some shame involved and there's probably some trauma involved.
yeah, like it's there's a lot of compassion for yourself. Like you can say, wow, like I might be wanting to close off right now and, maybe be by myself. But it's like, okay, well, let's allow that. Like maybe give that to yourself and then you can come back when you're ready. So there's more patience. And I like studying the trauma piece too, because to me there's more humanity. There's a humanity in it. Like there's a we're in it together. Everybody has some trauma. And I love the balance of trauma and soul because to me, soul is like our ideal, like it's our greatest possibility. Who we were here to live. It takes us to our best, our fullest expression of who we're here to be. But our humanity brings us down kind of to the hummus, to the ground, to the humility of actually like, like I hurt and sometimes I don't have it all and I'm just human. I've been hurt like everyone else. And sometimes I can only do my best, which might not be so good in this moment.
Yeah, right. And but that's what makes soul real when it's integrated with all of that
Mhm.
humble humanness.
Mhm.
It actually is grounded.
Mhm. Mhm.
I'm appreciating the thread of narrative here and something that I've found valuable for myself in working with and healing my own trauma is yeah, I agree with you. Not going back into the traumatic memory just to re-experience it, but to notice the narratives or the beliefs that were laid down maybe from those memories, and then open to the opportunity to rewrite your own story. And that to me is like such the essence really of what soul is all about too, is this inner knowing, this deeper truth that ultimately you are the one true author of your own life, and it's up to you to write your story. And it's like getting into the practice of doing that moment to moment and just kind of noticing when like, oop, oh, I think I'm actually running an outdated tape there. Like let's look back and see, where does that come from and how might I transform that into a more empowered story. And oftentimes that might involve, working with these hurt parts of ourselves and acknowledging what they have been through and appreciating them for the ways that they've found to survive and cope and the real gifts that they actually bring at their essence, and helping them graduate into a new narrative, like helping them realize that what happened back there is an old tape and it's outdated now, and we're in this new place, we're in this new phase, and we are this new version of ourselves who maybe doesn't need that outdated story anymore. Like I think back again to my first quest with you, Rebecca, and at that time I had a real strong trauma-based narrative that it wasn't okay for me to be weird, that I needed to act normal and be cool so that people would like me. And that goes back to elementary school for me. And at that point, second grade Brooks or what, like there was nothing more important than fitting in with my friends to that younger version of myself. But then I reached a point in my life in my 20s where that was becoming limiting because it was keeping me from my authenticity and it was keeping me from opening to the magic of talking to trees, for example.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing that. Personally, yeah,
Hmm.
there's a tenderness for when we notice um, um,
Yeah.
what that was. Yeah, I had a story. I can't be myself and be in relationship because that was an experience I had as a child. Like, I either had to choose who other people wanted me to be, or I could choose myself. But that wasn't who other people wanted. So yeah, it's very the edgy patterns that we learn about ourselves. They often come up. And I don't know if I said this earlier, but I think that when we encounter soul and we are called to live more courageously the vision that we received, we face more of our edges, like whatever before, prior to encountering soul, you can orchestrate your life to a certain level to maybe avoid as many of the uncomfortable hurts and edges. But for some reason, soul constantly guides us into those places of taking greater risk where we just encounter those places in ourselves more and more.
What do you think that's about? What is it that makes soul do that?
Well, I think partly soul exists to mature us, to help our personality, our human personality mature, to evolve to its vision. And that often means facing and being with some of the hardest parts of ourselves to be with. And so it's not really like we encounter our soul and, oh, good, done. It's like, oh, actually now I've really just embarked on a journey, a learning journey that's going to last like my whole life. Yeah, if I stay on that path.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah. Soul draws us into those challenging parts of ourselves that are ready to be healed, ready to mature and grow up in their own way, and also calls us into, I think soul calls us into uh encountering as well the outdated narratives and the limiting beliefs, the way that we are keeping ourselves small, because like you said, what soul is really all about is our fullest expression, our fullest becoming, our fullest aliveness. And to really embody that, to really realize that, requires us to shed some of the old skin or the limiting beliefs.
Mhm, mhm.
So now let's get to, at this point, to the idea of service. And one of the words you used to describe soul earlier in this conversation was the giveaway. But there's this real way that when we do walk this path and we do find our way into relationship with our souls and into relationship with nature and dreams and our bodies and our hearts and all these amazing different aspects of being alive, and when we integrate that to a certain point where we have healed enough of our trauma and kind of grown ourselves into the version of ourselves that really can be a channel for our soul's gifts to come through, gift is really what it becomes. It really is a giveaway. It's a service from the heart, and it's the most fulfilling, I think, thing we can perhaps ever do. But it's also such a beautiful way that we can really help out and give what is needed right now in, gosh, in our planet, in our world, in our communities. I mean, there is just to acknowledge like the scope of suffering and horror that that we continue to perpetuate as a species on each other and on this planet. Like, it really breaks my heart every single day.
Yeah.
And as you and I have discussed at length in the past, it can be a challenging tension to exist between wanting to do something about the world and the state of things versus, wanting to tend to this inner journey. And we can often feel caught in kind of what I would think is a false dichotomy of that it has to be either or, either action, either empowered service or inner work, when it really is one and the same. But would you share a little bit about your perspective on all of that?
Yeah. Well, I feel a little bit like that we encounter our soul and we get this vision and this image, and we're called to offer and contribute to the world in a certain way. And also, if we're also connected to our bodies and hearts, we can't help but be affected by the world around us, and it's suffering. There's such massive levels of harm. And I know that on some levels, sometimes we have to tune out from it because it's too much. But also, if we're whole and healthy and connected, then there's certainly some level of tuning in that would be happening. And so, that that we would acknowledge our connection. It's not like something else can be harm us. Like if we're all connected spiritually. And we are, we are all connected. Like what happens to the ecosystems um, affects us. What happens to the future generations that we can't yet see, because of the trajectory that we're on, it affects us. Like we're in relationship with everything, and so what's happening is happening to us too. And so we're given these relationships with the dream world, nature, spirit, soul, heart, body, and it's an empowering thing to have those relationships. It gives us power to operate, to change things. And so it's the gifts of the journey aren't just so that we'll feel better. Generally, that's not what happens anyway. Usually there's things that we do feel better in certain ways, and then also other things can be harder or feel worse sometimes. It's more, yeah, you don't feel better, but you feel more alive and like you're living a more meaningful life, more connected. Um, but we're given that to be of service into the world. Does that mean, like I said, we're supposed to just push ourselves to do whatever? No, of course not, because that would be out of alignment with our health and our body. But there is a responsibility. I think having a connection to soul and being whole, the responsibility is an ability to respond. It's an ability to feel what's happening, be in connection with it, and respond like in a way that feels authentic. The world needs, I mean, the everyday world that we're in is very troubled at the moment. And so it's not that we're trying to be the saviors, like, oh well, let's come in now and fix it all. Well, I don't know that we can. Um, but we can feel about it. We can be honest about it. We can, there's a lot we don't know, but there's some things that we do know, like that the present way humans are living is impacting the earth to such a great level that it is dying and it can't go on this way indefinitely. Like just a basic. So like if what can we do if we feel that's why it might be hard to say how could anybody say they're not traumatized, even just what we witness. Even if we witness something else we love being harmed, whether it's another human or a place on the earth, we're traumatized by witnessing that could happen to something that we love.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a part of being whole and living our souls embodies a responsibility to feel what's happening and respond.
I just am loving how that pulls together all of these threads that we have been weaving in this conversation and the ways we need to open ourselves to fully feeling our own experience first, including the places we feel hurt, even our trauma, but that allows us to develop a capacity to fully be with our experience in our present moment, and that's when soul can come in and really guide us and help us expand and evolve. And and then as we do that, we get to bring it all home, and we get to give it all back on the collective level where we actually stop being numb. We let go of our numbness to the terror of what is occurring, both what we're doing to the planet and nature and more than human world, and God, what we're due to ourselves and each other, the just the endless wars and the poisoning of our bodies and our environments. It's like, yeah, when you when you actually remember how to feel all that, is like, oh well, just yuck. Like that is just a like a visceral, like, yeah, body knows, like, no, we do not want this. And then but we can come at that with, like you said, really key ingredient of compassion, deep compassion for ourselves and for each other. And we can start to build a new way, like even in the smallest ways of just building a new way in your own life. Like you can't underestimate the ripple effects of that and how powerful that is. And then how, when more and more of us do that individually, and then we start weaving those threads together collectively, that's how we that's how we build a new earth. And that's how we rewrite our own narrative, right? Of who we are as a people, as a species, and as a planet.
Sometimes the massiveness of the grief, and the powerlessness of feeling like, well, how could I change anything? How could I do anything? Can be paralyzing. But it is, like you say, in the small things. It's you know what is mine to do? What's the action I can take that
Right.
that
And that is
can make a
more
difference?
than enough, actually.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, I feel inspired and so deeply grateful. Thank you so much, Rebecca. What a real pleasure this conversation has been. I just love hanging out with you and exploring these topics together and sharing and, yeah, learning. So thank you so much. And so glad we got to do this.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thanks so much for inviting me to the conversation. I had a great time too, and glad we got to explore this together. May it continue.
Hmm. Indeed. Yeah,
Thanks for
for
hosting these
sure.
conversations. What a gift.
Yeah. Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you. Yeah, it's really my pleasure. It feels like a really joyful and fulfilling aspect of my own soul's giveaway. This show. It's such a gift for me too. Um, Thank you for saying that. So, last but not least, I'd love to just give you a moment if there's anything in particular you would like to say to our listeners in terms of where they can best follow up with you or learn more about your work if that's something they want to do.
Great. Thank you. You could find me at my website, RebeccaWildbear.com, which kind of connects to everything. But I also have a Substack newsletter that you can connect me to me there. I usually put something out at least once a month, and a YouTube channel, just my name, Rebecca Wildbear. You can find me there. And I'm on all the social medias. My phone number and email are on my website, as well as online and in-person program offerings and old podcasts. So feel free to connect and see maybe about options and reach out if you want. Feel free to email or text.
Highly, highly recommend it, everybody. Okay, my friend. Thanks again. I'll talk to you next time.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for tuning into this episode. If you, like me, feel passionate about this idea of redefining the way we think about impact to a bit more of a soulful orientation and what that could do for our planet, for our species, for all beings, then please, 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 I'd love to ask for your help. If you could just take a moment to subscribe on whatever platform you receive this podcast and leave, if it feels right to you, a glowing 5-star review. That will do wonders in supporting me in growing this show, attracting more amazing guests, and really bringing this movement, this exploration out into the world. Reviews and subscriptions on YouTube are particularly helpful, and whatever platform that you choose is great. Thank you so much for your time and attention. so glad you joined us here for this conversation today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.